My name is Madison, and I'm 26 years old. I thought I knew my family until the day my phone buzzed during the most important client meeting of my career as a financial analyst. The notification made my blood run cold. Alert, $10,000 charge, Wanderlust Luxury Travel Agency. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, my mind racing through possibilities. Identity theft? Hacked account? Then the horrifying realization hit me like a freight train. My parents had the emergency credit card I'd given them for genuine emergencies only. This wasn't a medical crisis or home repair. This was something far worse. Before we dive into this unbelievable story of family betrayal and financial manipulation, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride. Make sure to subscribe because trust me, you won't believe how this story unfolds. Now, let me tell you exactly how my own parents used my hard-earned money to fund my sister's dream vacation while leaving me drowning in debt. Growing up in a modest household in suburban Ohio, I learned the value of hard work early. While other kids spent summers at camps or lounging by pools, I was flipping burgers, stocking shelves, and tutoring younger students to save every penny for college. My parents, Douglas and Catherine, always struggled financially, living paycheck to paycheck despite their best efforts. They worked multiple jobs just to keep our small 3-bedroom house and put food on the table. I understood their limitations and never complained about hand-me-down clothes or generic cereal instead of name brands. My sister Brittany, 3 years younger, took a completely different approach to life. While I was grinding through community college classes and working 3 part-time jobs, she was skipping school, partying with friends, and expecting our parents to fund her every whim. She'd throw tantrums when they couldn't buy her designer jeans or the latest smartphone, accusing them of loving me more because I had learned to be self-sufficient. The irony was devastating because our parents actually bent over backward to accommodate her demands, often sacrificing their own needs to keep Brittany happy. After graduating with my finance degree, I landed an entry-level position at a respected investment firm downtown. Every dollar I earned felt precious because I remembered what it was like to choose between groceries and gas money. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, drove a used car with 200,000 miles, and saved aggressively while slowly building my career. My parents were proud but also seemed almost resentful of my success, as if my achievements somehow highlighted their own perceived failures. When I finally earned enough to move into a decent 1-bedroom apartment and upgrade my ancient laptop, I wanted to help my family. I gave my parents an emergency credit card with a $5,000 limit, explicitly stating it was for medical emergencies, major home repairs, or similar crises. I trusted them completely because despite their financial struggles, they had always been honest people who worked hard and lived within their means. The card sat in their kitchen drawer for 2 years without being touched, which gave me confidence in their integrity and respect for boundaries. Brittany, meanwhile, had dropped out of college after 1 semester, claiming the coursework was too stressful and professors were unfair to her. She bounced between minimum-wage jobs, never lasting more than a few months before quitting due to personality conflicts with managers or coworkers. Our parents enabled this pattern by allowing her to live rent-free at home, paying for her car insurance, phone bill, and providing spending money whenever she asked. They justified this support by saying Brittany was still finding herself and needed time to discover her passion. The morning I received that devastating bank alert, I was presenting quarterly projections to our firm's biggest client. My phone was supposed to be silent, but emergency notifications always broke through my settings. Seeing that massive charge during such a crucial moment felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke. I excused myself from the conference room, my face burning with embarrassment as colleagues exchanged confused glances. In the hallway, I frantically called my bank's fraud department, convinced someone had stolen my information and was living it up on my dime. The customer service representative confirmed the charge was legitimate and processed using the physical card in my parents' possession. My heart sank into my stomach as I realized my family had betrayed my trust in the most devastating way possible. I immediately called my mother, my voice shaking with disbelief and rage. Catherine answered on the second ring with an unusually cheerful tone that made my blood boil. "Oh honey, Brittany is having the most wonderful time in Paris," she gushed before I could even speak. "She sent us pictures of the Eiffel Tower this morning, and she looks so happy. You should see the beautiful hotel room we got her. She deserves this vacation after everything she's been through lately." The casual way she mentioned we got her as if they had paid for this extravagance themselves made me want to scream. I demanded an immediate explanation, and Catherine's tone shifted to defensive justification. She explained that Brittany had been depressed about her recent job loss and needed something to look forward to. According to my mother, they had decided that funding a luxury European vacation would help Brittany gain confidence and maybe even meet someone special who could provide the stability she lacked. The conversation grew increasingly heated as I explained that the emergency card was never intended for vacations, regardless of anyone's emotional state. Catherine became hostile, accusing me of being selfish and unsupportive of family members who were struggling. She claimed I had more money than I knew what to do with and should be happy to help my sister experience some joy in her difficult life. The entitlement in her voice was breathtaking, as if my years of sacrifice and hard work had somehow created an obligation to fund my sister's whims. By the time I returned to the conference room, my presentation was ruined, and the client meeting had moved forward without me. My supervisor, Janet, pulled me aside afterward with barely contained frustration. She made it clear that personal emergencies could not continue disrupting my professional responsibilities, especially during critical client interactions. The irony was crushing because this wasn't my emergency at all, but rather a crisis created entirely by my family's selfish choices and complete disregard for boundaries. Within hours of my confrontation with Catherine, my father Douglas called with what I now recognize as a carefully orchestrated guilt campaign. His approach was more sophisticated than my mother's defensive outburst, beginning with expressions of understanding for my upset feelings before slowly shifting into emotional manipulation designed to make me question my own justified anger. Douglas had always been the family's smooth talker, able to convince neighbors to loan him tools, employers to give him second chances, and creditors to extend payment deadlines through sheer charisma and sob stories. "Madison, sweetheart, I know you're upset about the credit card situation," he began in that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "But you need to understand the bigger picture here. Your mother and I have sacrificed everything for you girls over the years. Do you remember when I worked double shifts at the factory so you could take those expensive SAT prep courses? Do you remember when your mother sold her grandmother's jewelry to pay for your college application fees? We never asked for anything in return because that's what parents do for their children." The manipulation was expertly crafted to reframe my legitimate anger as ingratitude for past parental investments. Douglas continued building his case by listing every sacrifice they had made during my childhood, as if those normal parental responsibilities had created some sort of debt that I was now obligated to repay through funding my sister's irresponsible lifestyle. He conveniently ignored the fact that I had worked multiple jobs throughout college, paid my own living expenses, and graduated debt-free through my own determination rather than their financial support. "Brittany hasn't had the same advantages you've had," Douglas continued, his voice taking on a wounded tone. "She struggled with confidence issues her whole life, watching her older sister succeed while she fell behind. This trip isn't just a vacation, Madison. It's therapy. It's giving her the chance to see herself as worthy of beautiful experiences and maybe attract the kind of successful partner who could provide the security she's never had. You've always been the strong one, the independent one. Can't you find it in your heart to help your sister become strong too?" The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Douglas was simultaneously painting me as privileged and selfish while portraying Brittany as a victim deserving of compensation for my success. He ignored the countless times I had tried to help my sister find stable employment, improve her resume, or develop practical life skills. Every offer of assistance had been rejected because Brittany preferred dramatic victimhood to actual effort and responsibility. While Douglas was working on my emotions through phone calls, Brittany had launched her own campaign of manipulation through social media. Her Instagram account exploded with carefully curated posts designed to maximize both envy and guilt. Photos of elaborate French pastries at sidewalk cafes were captioned with messages like "finally experiencing the finer things in life thanks to family who actually care about my happiness." Pictures of designer shopping bags included comments about investing in self-worth after years of settling for less. The most infuriating posts were the ones that directly tagged me with passive-aggressive captions. A photo of her expensive hotel room overlooked the Seine River with the message, "When your sister finally understands that family means supporting each other's dreams, not just your own." A picture of her dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant included the tag "Madison, thank you for making this possible, even though I had to convince mom and dad you'd want me to be happy." These posts created a public narrative that I had willingly funded this extravagance, making it nearly impossible for me to correct the record without seeming petty or vindictive. Extended family members began commenting with congratulations on my generosity and expressions of how wonderful it was to see sisters supporting each other. My cousin Jennifer left multiple comments about how she wished her siblings were as selfless as me, completely unaware that I had never consented to any of this spending. My Aunt Rebecca, Douglas's sister, called me 2 days later with a lecture about family loyalty that left me speechless with rage. She had apparently received a carefully edited version of events from my parents, portraying me as reluctant to help despite my comfortable financial situation. Rebecca reminded me that family was supposed to come first, and that successful family members had obligations to lift up those who were still struggling. She suggested that my anger over the credit card situation revealed a selfish character that was disappointing to witness in someone they had all watched grow up. The systematic nature of this campaign became clear as more relatives reached out with similar messages. My Uncle Thomas mentioned how proud they were of my success and how natural it seemed for me to want to share that success with Brittany. My grandmother Evelyn called with confusion about why there seemed to be tension in the family when everyone should be celebrating Brittany's opportunity to experience European culture. Each conversation revealed that my parents had been spinning this narrative for weeks, preparing the family for my inevitable resistance to their theft. Meanwhile, the financial impact of their betrayal was becoming increasingly severe. The $10,000 charge had maxed out my emergency credit card and triggered over-limit fees that pushed the total even higher. My carefully managed budget, designed to cover mortgage payments, car insurance, and living expenses while building savings, was completely destroyed overnight. I found myself having to choose between groceries and gas money for the first time since college, a humiliating reminder of the financial insecurity I had worked so hard to escape. The stress affected every aspect of my life, including my relationship with Tyler, my boyfriend of 8 months. Initially supportive and outraged on my behalf, Tyler grew increasingly frustrated as the drama consumed more of my time and emotional energy. He couldn't understand why I didn't simply demand immediate repayment and cut contact with my family when they refused. Tyler came from a stable middle-class background where parents respected boundaries and financial theft between family members was unthinkable. "Why are you even still talking to them?" Tyler demanded during one particularly difficult evening. "They stole from you, Madison. They literally committed fraud and then tried to make you feel guilty about being upset. Normal families don't do this to each other. You need to call the police and report them, not waste time trying to reason with people who obviously don't respect you." His inability to understand the complex emotional manipulation involved in family financial abuse created tension in our relationship that my parents' actions had never intended but certainly achieved. I felt isolated and confused, caught between loyalty to family members who had violated my trust and a boyfriend who couldn't comprehend why this wasn't a simple matter of right and wrong requiring immediate legal action. Just when I thought the situation couldn't possibly get worse, Brittany decided to extend her European adventure beyond the original 10-day itinerary my parents had funded with my stolen money. The additional charges began appearing on my account 3 days before her scheduled return flight, starting with modest expenses that I initially assumed were last-minute souvenirs or meal upgrades. A charge for $200 at a luxury boutique, another $300 at a high-end cosmetics store, and a $500 spa treatment that made my already dire financial situation even more desperate. When I called my parents demanding explanations for these new charges, Catherine responded with shocking casualness, as if extending the vacation was the most natural thing in the world. "Oh, Brittany met this wonderful businessman named Ricardo," she explained excitedly. "He's showing her around Rome and wants to take her to Venice for a few days. She can't pass up this opportunity, Madison. He might be exactly what she needs to turn her life around." The naive enthusiasm in my mother's voice was both infuriating and heartbreaking. She genuinely believed that encouraging my sister to extend an already expensive vacation with a stranger she had just met represented good parenting rather than enabling dangerous behavior. Catherine seemed completely oblivious to the obvious safety concerns of my sister traveling with an unknown man, focusing instead on the romantic possibility of Brittany finding a wealthy European husband to solve all her problems. My demands for Brittany's immediate return home were dismissed as jealousy and controlling behavior. Douglas joined the conversation with his usual manipulative tactics, suggesting that my opposition to the trip extension revealed deep-seated resentment toward my sister's happiness. "You've had your chances at success and romance," he said with breathtaking cruelty. "Why can't you let Brittany have hers? This Ricardo fellow sounds like he could provide the kind of stability she's never had. Isn't that worth a few extra days of vacation expenses?" The few extra days turned into a full week of additional luxury spending that pushed my credit card debt to crushing levels. Brittany and her mysterious Ricardo traveled from Rome to Venice, then to the French Riviera, staying in five-star hotels and dining at restaurants that cost more per meal than I typically spent on groceries in a month. Each new charge felt like a personal attack, a deliberate attempt to punish me for my success and independence. What made the situation even more devastating was discovering that my parents had been actively facilitating these additional expenses through more sophisticated fraud techniques. While researching the charges with my bank's fraud department, I learned that 3 new store credit cards had been opened using my personal information. The applications included details that only family members would know, such as my childhood address, my first pet's name, and my mother's maiden name. My parents had provided these security answers to help Brittany establish additional credit in my name, allowing her to purchase designer clothing, expensive jewelry, and luxury accessories throughout her extended European tour. The discovery that my own parents had participated in systematic identity theft felt like a complete betrayal of everything I had believed about their character and values. These weren't desperate people making a single bad decision in a moment of crisis. These were calculated criminals who had planned and executed multiple forms of financial fraud. The impact on my credit score was immediate and devastating. Within days of these new accounts being opened and immediately maxed out, my credit rating dropped by over 100 points. Pre-approved credit card offers stopped arriving in my mail, and my bank began sending warnings about my debt-to-income ratio approaching dangerous levels. The financial stability I had spent years building was being systematically destroyed by people I had trusted completely. My attempts to report the fraud were complicated by the fact that the perpetrators were family members with legitimate access to my personal information. Bank representatives expressed sympathy but explained that prosecuting relatives for identity theft required police reports and formal criminal charges that most people were reluctant to file against their own parents and siblings. The legal advisor I consulted confirmed that family financial abuse cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute because victims often refused to follow through with criminal proceedings. Meanwhile, the stress of this ongoing crisis was seriously threatening my career. My supervisor Janet had already expressed concern about my decreased performance during the initial credit card incident, and the continued phone calls, bank visits, and emotional upheaval were making it impossible to maintain professional focus. I found myself making calculation errors, missing important deadlines, and struggling to concentrate during client meetings as my personal life consumed increasing amounts of mental energy. The breaking point came during a crucial presentation to potential investors where I completely lost my train of thought mid-sentence, staring blankly at the PowerPoint slide while 20 professional faces stared back at me with growing concern. Janet pulled me into her office immediately afterward with barely contained frustration, making it clear that my job security was now in serious jeopardy. Madison, I understand you're dealing with family issues, Janet said in that carefully controlled tone that managers use before delivering ultimatums. But this level of distraction is affecting not just your work but the entire team's ability to serve our clients effectively. I need you to resolve whatever is happening in your personal life immediately, or we'll need to discuss whether this position is still the right fit for you. The threat of losing my job on top of the financial devastation felt like the final straw. Everything I had worked for throughout my entire adult life was crumbling because my family had decided to steal from me and then manipulate me into accepting their theft as somehow justified. Tyler's patience was also wearing thin as the drama continued consuming our relationship, with conversations increasingly focused on my family's latest outrageous behavior rather than our shared interests and future plans. I can't do this anymore, Madison, Tyler said during what would become our final serious conversation. Your family is toxic, and you're letting them destroy not just your finances but everything good in your life. I care about you, but I can't watch you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Until you're ready to cut them off completely and focus on your own well-being, I think we need to take a break. His departure felt like another casualty of my parents' selfishness, another relationship destroyed by their inability to respect boundaries or consider consequences. I was rapidly becoming isolated from everyone who mattered while my family continued their campaign of manipulation and guilt, demanding that I apologize to Brittany for ruining her vacation mood with my selfish concerns about financial responsibility. The final insult came when my parents informed me that they expected me to cover not just the existing charges but also Brittany's return flight, which had been rescheduled multiple times and now cost significantly more than the original booking. They presented this demand as if it were a reasonable request rather than the final stage of an elaborate theft scheme designed to maximize my financial damage while minimizing their own responsibility. The true scope of my family's financial manipulation became clear 3 weeks into Brittany's extended European adventure when I received a phone call that shattered any remaining illusions about their character. My neighbor Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had lived next door to my parents for 15 years, called with concern about unusual activity at their house. Real estate agents had been measuring the property, photographers were taking listing photos, and my parents had been telling neighbors they were planning to downsize to a smaller place. My heart sank as I realized what this meant. I immediately contacted a family friend who worked in real estate and discovered that my parents had indeed remortgaged their home, taking out a second loan against the equity they had built over decades. The new mortgage was significantly larger than their existing loan, providing them with approximately $30,000 in cash that they were using to fund not just Brittany's vacation but an entire lifestyle upgrade they couldn't afford. When I confronted Douglas about this discovery, his response revealed a level of financial irresponsibility and entitlement that left me speechless. He casually admitted that they had planned to default on the new mortgage from the beginning, expecting me to bail them out when the foreclosure proceedings began. In his twisted logic, I owed them this assistance because their years of sacrifice during my childhood had created a debt that could never be fully repaid. We figured you'd rather help us keep the house than see your parents become homeless, Douglas explained with breathtaking cynicism. The mortgage company won't miss the money, but losing our family home would be devastating for your mother's emotional well-being. You're successful enough to handle these kinds of financial challenges, and helping family should be your priority now that you're doing so well. The calculated nature of this plan was absolutely stunning. My parents had deliberately taken on debt they couldn't repay, spent my money without permission, and created a financial crisis specifically designed to manipulate me into providing even more support. They had turned my success and financial responsibility into weapons to be used against me, exploiting my love for them to justify increasingly outrageous demands for money and resources. Meanwhile, Brittany's European adventure had evolved into something even more concerning than expensive tourism. Her social media posts revealed that she was now presenting herself as a wealthy American heiress to attract wealthy European men, using photos from expensive restaurants and luxury hotels as evidence of her affluent lifestyle. She had apparently told multiple potential romantic partners that her family owned successful businesses in America and that her current trip was just a casual vacation funded by family wealth. My mother Catherine was actively encouraging this deception, believing that Brittany's fabricated wealthy status might help her attract a genuinely wealthy husband who could provide long-term financial security. During our increasingly hostile phone conversations, Catherine would provide updates about Brittany's romantic prospects with various European businessmen, expressing excitement about the possibility of my sister marrying into money and moving permanently overseas. "Ricardo has connections in the fashion industry," Catherine gushed during one particularly infuriating call. "And that banker she met in Monaco seems very interested in her background. Brittany says he's been asking about our family's business investments and seems impressed by her sophisticated lifestyle. This trip could change everything for her future, Madison. Can't you see how important that is?" The delusion was breathtaking. Catherine genuinely believed that encouraging my sister to deceive wealthy men about her background represented good parenting and smart strategy rather than potentially dangerous fraud. She seemed completely oblivious to the obvious risks of Brittany building relationships based on lies, or the legal consequences that might result from misrepresenting our family's financial status to international businesspeople. The situation became even more alarming when I discovered that my parents had been making promises about my financial resources to support Brittany's deceptive persona. During a particularly painful conversation with my Uncle Thomas, I learned that my parents had been telling extended family members that I was planning to invest in several European business ventures through connections Brittany was making during her travels. They had apparently suggested that my finance background made me an ideal partner for international investment opportunities. "Your dad mentioned you're looking at some fashion import business that Brittany's new friend is connected to," Thomas said with enthusiasm. "It sounds like a great opportunity for you to expand beyond domestic investments. Douglas is so proud of how you're using your success to help the whole family build wealth together." This revelation was horrifying because it meant my parents were not just spending my money but actively misrepresenting my involvement in their schemes. They were creating financial obligations and expectations that I had never agreed to while positioning themselves as intermediaries in supposed business deals that existed only in their imagination. The potential legal and professional consequences of these misrepresentations were staggering. My attempts to correct these false narratives were consistently undermined by my parents' ongoing manipulation campaign. Every time I tried to explain to family members that I had not authorized any of these expenses or business ventures, my parents would counter with more elaborate stories about my supposed involvement and enthusiasm for helping Brittany establish herself in European society. The psychological toll of constantly defending myself against lies created by my own family was becoming unbearable. I began questioning my own memory and judgment, wondering if somehow I had given permission for things I clearly remembered opposing. The gaslighting was sophisticated and relentless, designed to make me doubt my own perceptions and accept my family's version of reality where I was a willing participant in this elaborate fraud. The final revelation that destroyed any remaining hope for reconciliation came when my grandmother Evelyn called with information she thought I should know. During a family gathering I had missed due to work obligations, she had overheard my parents discussing their long-term strategy for managing my finances. They had apparently been planning this European vacation scheme for over 6 months, carefully researching luxury travel options and calculating exactly how much they could spend before I would be likely to take legal action. "They were laughing about how predictable you are," Evelyn said with obvious distress. "Douglas said you're too responsible to let family members face serious consequences, so they could push the spending pretty far before you'd actually call the police. Catherine mentioned that you'd probably complain but eventually accept the situation because that's what good daughters do for their families." Learning that my parents viewed my love and loyalty as weaknesses to be exploited felt like the ultimate betrayal. They had studied my character specifically to identify vulnerabilities they could manipulate, turning my positive qualities into tools for their financial abuse. The casual nature of their discussion, as if stealing from me was an amusing family project rather than a serious crime, revealed a level of callousness I hadn't believed they possessed. This conversation with my grandmother finally convinced me that my family's behavior wasn't the result of temporary desperation or poor judgment. They had deliberately planned and executed a sophisticated fraud scheme, counting on my emotional attachment and financial responsibility to prevent serious consequences. The people I had trusted most in the world had studied me like a mark in a confidence game, identifying exactly how to maximize their theft while minimizing their risk. The complete collapse of my carefully constructed adult life came exactly 5 weeks after that first devastating bank alert, when multiple financial catastrophes converged in a single horrific day that felt like cosmic punishment for some unknown crime. I woke up to an eviction notice taped to my apartment door, informing me that my rent check had bounced due to insufficient funds, a humiliating reminder that my parents' theft had destroyed my ability to meet even basic living expenses. The irony was crushing because this apartment had represented everything I had worked towards since graduating college. Located in a safe neighborhood with reliable parking and updated appliances, it had taken me 3 years to save enough for the security deposit and first month's rent. Every piece of furniture had been carefully chosen and budgeted for, creating a space that felt stable and adult after years of living in cramped student housing with multiple roommates. Now I was facing homelessness because my parents had decided that funding my sister's luxury vacation was more important than ensuring I could maintain basic housing security. The eviction notice gave me 30 days to bring my account current or vacate the premises, but my credit cards were maxed out from Brittany's unauthorized charges, and my savings account had been drained to cover minimum payments on debts I hadn't created. The situation deteriorated further when I arrived at work to find a repossession notice on my car windshield. The auto loan payment had been automatically deducted from my checking account the same day my rent check bounced, but there weren't sufficient funds to cover both obligations. My 10-year-old Honda Civic wasn't worth much, but it was reliable transportation that allowed me to commute to work and maintain the independence I had fought so hard to achieve. Watching the tow truck driver hook up my car while curious neighbors observed from their windows felt like a public announcement of my financial failure. The humiliation was overwhelming because everyone in my apartment complex had seen me leave for work every morning in professional attire, creating an impression of stability and success that was now being dramatically shattered in front of their eyes. Janet, my supervisor, called me into her office before I had even reached my desk, having apparently received reports about the parking lot incident from colleagues who had arrived earlier. Her expression was a mixture of concern and frustration as she delivered what amounted to a final ultimatum about my employment status. "Madison, I've tried to be patient while you work through these personal difficulties," she began in that carefully controlled tone that managers use before ending careers. "But the distraction level has reached a point where it's affecting our entire team's productivity. Missing client meetings, calculation errors in financial projections, and now having your vehicle repossessed in our company parking lot creates concerns about your professional judgment and stability." The threat was clear: resolve my personal crisis immediately or face termination from the job that represented my only source of income and professional identity. After years of climbing the corporate ladder through careful networking and consistent performance, I was about to lose everything because my family's selfish choices had made it impossible for me to function professionally. The final devastating blow came when Tyler arrived at my apartment that evening with boxes to collect his belongings and a carefully rehearsed speech about needing to prioritize his own emotional well-being. His decision to end our relationship felt inevitable but still landed like a physical blow, removing the last supportive presence in my rapidly shrinking world. "I can't watch you destroy yourself trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed," Tyler explained with obvious pain in his voice. "Your family is toxic, Madison. They're using your love and loyalty to manipulate you into accepting abuse that no normal person would tolerate. I care about you too much to enable this self-destruction by staying and pretending everything will somehow work out." His departure meant losing not just romantic companionship but also practical support during the most difficult period of my adult life. Tyler had been providing emotional stability and objective perspective that helped me maintain sanity during my family's escalating manipulation campaigns. Without his presence, I felt completely isolated and vulnerable to their psychological warfare tactics. The crushing weight of multiple simultaneous crises made it almost impossible to think clearly or develop effective strategies for recovery. Every phone call from my parents brought new demands for understanding and forgiveness, with Catherine insisting that my financial difficulties were temporary inconveniences that paled in comparison to Brittany's need for continued emotional support through her European adventure. "You're being incredibly selfish, Madison," Catherine declared during one particularly hostile conversation. "Brittany is finally finding happiness and confidence, and all you can think about is money. We raised you to be more generous and family-oriented than this. I'm honestly disappointed in the person you've become since achieving some financial success." The psychological manipulation was expertly crafted to make me question my own justified anger while positioning my family as victims of my supposed greed and selfishness. Catherine's ability to completely ignore the reality of their theft while portraying me as the villain in this situation demonstrated a level of narcissistic manipulation that left me speechless with rage and confusion. My parents' demands reached peak absurdity when they called to insist that I wire additional money to cover Brittany's return flight, which had been rescheduled multiple times and now cost significantly more than the original booking. They presented this request as if it were my responsibility rather than the natural consequence of their own poor planning and financial irresponsibility. "We can't just leave Brittany stranded in Europe," Douglas argued with his usual combination of guilt and manipulation. "She's your sister, Madison. Family takes care of family, especially when someone is vulnerable and far from home. This whole situation could have been avoided if you had been more supportive from the beginning instead of making everything about money and rules." The breathtaking audacity of blaming me for a crisis they had created through deliberate theft was the final straw that pushed me toward complete emotional breakdown. I found myself seriously considering simply giving up the fight and accepting whatever financial destruction they wanted to impose, just to end the constant stress and manipulation that was consuming every aspect of my life. That moment of near surrender came during my darkest hour, sitting alone in my soon-to-be-lost apartment surrounded by eviction notices and maxed-out credit card statements, when my phone rang with what initially seemed like another guilt trip call from family. Instead, my grandmother Evelyn's voice brought the first genuine ray of hope I had experienced in weeks. "Madison, honey, I've been documenting everything," she said in a conspiratorial whisper. "I have recordings of your parents admitting they planned this whole thing. I think it's time you knew exactly what kind of people you're dealing with, and I have evidence that might help you fight back." My grandmother Evelyn's phone call came at the exact moment when I had nearly convinced myself to surrender completely to my family's financial manipulation, and her words provided the first genuine hope I had felt in weeks of escalating crisis. At 82 years old, my grandmother had always been the family's voice of reason, but I had assumed she was too elderly and trusting to understand the sophisticated nature of my parents' fraud scheme. "I've been recording our family conversations for months," Evelyn explained in a voice that was both determined and slightly trembling. "Your father doesn't know that my new hearing aids have a recording feature that my doctor showed me how to use. I have hours of audio where your parents discuss their plans to take your money and their strategies for manipulating you into accepting their behavior." The revelation that my elderly grandmother had been conducting covert surveillance operations against my parents would have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, it felt like divine intervention, providing potential evidence that could finally expose their systematic fraud and manipulation to legal authorities who required proof beyond my word against theirs. My college roommate Sarah had been following my social media posts with growing concern, and she called the same day to offer practical support that extended far beyond emotional sympathy. Her family owned a small law firm that specialized in financial crimes, and she had already discussed my situation with her father, who believed I had grounds for both criminal prosecution and civil recovery of stolen funds. "Pack whatever you can fit in a suitcase and come stay with me," Sarah offered without hesitation. "My apartment has a spare room, and you need to get away from your parents' influence while we figure out how to fight this properly. My dad wants to meet with you tomorrow to review the evidence and discuss your legal options." Moving in with Sarah provided not just housing security but also emotional distance from my family's constant manipulation campaigns. For the first time in weeks, I could think clearly without my parents calling every few hours to deliver new guilt trips or demands for additional financial support. The change of environment also allowed me to begin documenting the full scope of their fraud rather than simply reacting to each new crisis as it emerged. Sarah's father, attorney William Rodriguez, specialized in family financial abuse cases and immediately recognized patterns in my parents' behavior that indicated sophisticated rather than impulsive criminal activity. During our first consultation, he explained that most family fraud cases involved desperate people making single bad decisions, but my parents had demonstrated planning, coordination, and systematic manipulation that suggested predatory rather than circumstantial behavior. Your parents studied you, Rodriguez explained with professional detachment that somehow made the situation feel less personal and more manageable. They identified your vulnerabilities, planned their approach, and executed a sophisticated fraud scheme designed to maximize their gain while minimizing their legal risk. This isn't family dysfunction, Madison. This is organized crime that happens to involve relatives. Rodriguez recommended hiring a private investigator to document the full extent of my parents' fraudulent activities, suspecting that my case might not be isolated but rather part of a broader pattern of financial abuse targeting multiple victims. The investigator, Marcus Thompson, had extensive experience with family fraud cases and immediately began uncovering evidence that my parents had been planning this scheme for much longer than I had realized. The investigation revealed that my parents had been monitoring my financial progress for years, using information gathered during casual family conversations to track my income, expenses, and saving patterns. They had calculated exactly how much they could steal without triggering immediate legal action, and had researched my personality traits to identify the most effective manipulation strategies for maintaining psychological control. Marcus discovered that this wasn't my parents' first venture into family fraud. My Uncle Thomas reluctantly admitted that they had borrowed $5,000 from him 2 years earlier for supposed medical expenses that turned out to be financing for a vacation to Las Vegas. Thomas had never pursued repayment because he assumed the money was a gift to help family members during a medical crisis that had never actually existed. Even more disturbing was Marcus's discovery that my parents had been systematically gathering personal information about extended family members, apparently identifying potential targets for future fraud schemes. They had collected social security numbers, birth dates, and financial information from relatives under the guise of family record keeping, creating a database of potential victims for identity theft operations. The scope of their criminal activity was staggering and suggested that my case represented not an isolated incident of poor judgment but rather evidence of an ongoing criminal enterprise operated by people I had trusted completely. Marcus's investigation provided documentation that transformed my situation from a family dispute requiring mediation into a clear-cut case of organized fraud requiring criminal prosecution. Meanwhile, my cousin Jennifer had begun questioning my parents' version of events after noticing inconsistencies in their explanations for Brittany's extended European vacation. She reached out to apologize for initially accepting their portrayal of me as selfish and unsupportive, admitting that their stories had never quite made sense but that she had been reluctant to challenge older family members. "I started thinking about how hard you worked growing up and how responsible you've always been," Jennifer explained during a tearful phone conversation. "It never made sense that you would suddenly become stingy about helping family, especially when you've been so generous in the past. I should have questioned their story from the beginning instead of assuming they were telling the truth." Jennifer's support was particularly meaningful because she had been one of the most vocal critics of my supposed selfishness during the early stages of this crisis. Her willingness to reconsider the situation and acknowledge that my parents had been lying provided validation that I wasn't overreacting to normal family dysfunction but rather responding appropriately to criminal behavior. The private investigator's work also uncovered evidence that Brittany's European adventure involved significantly more fraud than even I had realized. She had been using my identity to establish credit relationships with multiple luxury retailers, accumulating debts that would eventually trace back to my social security number and credit profile. The sophisticated nature of these identity theft operations suggested professional rather than amateur criminal knowledge. Most importantly, Marcus discovered that my parents had been documenting their own criminal activity through text messages, emails, and recorded phone conversations that they apparently assumed would never be discovered by legal authorities. Their casual discussions of fraud strategies and victim manipulation tactics provided prosecutors with exactly the kind of evidence needed to secure convictions in family fraud cases. Armed with this evidence and supported by a growing network of allies who had initially been deceived by my parents' manipulation campaigns, I finally felt capable of fighting back effectively rather than simply enduring their financial abuse. The transformation from isolated victim to supported survivor felt like emerging from an emotional prison that had been constructed through years of careful psychological manipulation. The decision to pursue formal legal action against my own parents felt both terrifying and liberating, representing a complete break from the dysfunctional family loyalty that had enabled their abuse for years. With attorney Rodriguez's guidance and the evidence gathered by private investigator Marcus Thompson, I filed comprehensive criminal fraud charges with the local police department, providing documentation that clearly demonstrated the premeditated and systematic nature of their financial crimes. The police detective assigned to my case, Sarah Martinez, had extensive experience with family financial abuse and immediately recognized the sophistication of my parents' fraud operation. She explained that most family theft cases involved emotional decisions made during temporary crises, but my parents had demonstrated planning, coordination, and psychological manipulation that indicated predatory rather than desperate behavior. Your parents created a comprehensive fraud scheme designed to maximize their financial gain while minimizing their legal exposure, Detective Martinez explained during our initial interview. They studied your psychological profile, identified your vulnerabilities, and executed a long-term manipulation campaign. This isn't family dysfunction requiring counseling. This is organized crime requiring prosecution. Filing criminal charges required providing detailed financial documentation that revealed the full scope of damage to my credit, career, and personal relationships. The paperwork alone took several days to complete, but each form felt like reclaiming control over my own life rather than accepting my role as a victim of people who had exploited my love and trust for their personal benefit. Simultaneously, I began the process of freezing all remaining accounts and changing every piece of security information that my parents might have accessed during their fraud operation. This included not just bank accounts and credit cards, but also employment records, insurance policies, and medical information that they could potentially use for future identity theft schemes. The most emotionally difficult aspect of fighting back was accepting that my relationship with my parents would never recover from this betrayal, regardless of the legal outcome. Filing criminal charges against people who had raised me felt like a fundamental violation of family loyalty, but Rodriguez helped me understand that real family relationships are built on mutual respect rather than one-sided exploitation. My public response to their fraud came through a carefully crafted social media post that provided factual documentation of their theft while avoiding inflammatory language that might complicate legal proceedings. The post included screenshots of unauthorized charges, copies of police reports, and a timeline of events that clearly demonstrated my lack of consent for any vacation-related expenses. After weeks of family members congratulating me for my generosity in funding my sister's European vacation, I want to clarify that I never authorized or approved any of these expenses, my post began. My parents used my emergency credit card without permission to fund over $10,000 in luxury travel expenses, then attempted to manipulate me into accepting their theft as normal family support. The response to this post was overwhelming and largely supportive, with friends, colleagues, and extended family members expressing shock at the true circumstances behind Brittany's vacation photos. Many people shared their own experiences with family financial abuse, creating a community of support that helped me understand how common this type of manipulation actually is. The impact on Brittany's European adventure was immediate and dramatic. When the unauthorized credit cards were canceled and fraud alerts were placed on all accounts associated with my identity, her ability to continue funding luxury experiences ended abruptly. She found herself stranded at a 5-star hotel in Rome with no way to pay for additional nights or return transportation to the United States. Her frantic phone calls to my parents revealed the complete lack of contingency planning that had characterized their entire fraud operation. They had apparently assumed that I would eventually accept their theft and continue providing financial support rather than taking legal action that would expose their criminal behavior to law enforcement authorities. "Madison, you have to help me get home," Brittany pleaded during a desperate international phone call that I recorded for legal documentation purposes. "I'm stuck here with no money and no way to pay for a flight." Ricardo turned out to be a complete fraud who was just using me for expensive dinners. "I'll pay you back every penny, I promise. Just please don't leave me stranded in a foreign country." The irony of Brittany calling me for rescue after weeks of social media posts celebrating her luxury lifestyle at my expense was not lost on me, but I felt no satisfaction in her predicament. Instead, I calmly explained that she should contact our parents for assistance, since they were the ones who had planned and funded her vacation through identity theft and credit card fraud. My parents' response to the legal charges was a predictable mixture of outrage, denial, and desperate attempts at emotional manipulation designed to convince me to drop the criminal case before it proceeded to trial. They alternated between claiming they had my permission for the expenses and suggesting that family members shouldn't involve law enforcement in personal disputes. "You're destroying this family over money," Catherine accused during one particularly hostile phone conversation. "We gave you life, raised you, supported your education, and this is how you repay us? By having your own parents arrested like common criminals?" I never thought I raised a daughter who could be so cold and vindictive toward the people who love her most. The guilt-tripping was expertly crafted but no longer effective because Rodriguez had prepared me for exactly these manipulation tactics. Understanding that their emotional appeals were calculated strategies rather than genuine expressions of hurt made it easier to maintain boundaries and refuse to accept responsibility for consequences they had created through their own criminal choices. The civil lawsuit seeking full restitution of stolen funds proceeded simultaneously with the criminal case, creating financial pressure that forced my parents to confront the reality of their actions rather than simply waiting for me to forgive and forget their theft. The court-ordered asset freeze prevented them from hiding or spending money that might be needed for restitution payments. Meanwhile, my credit recovery process began with fraud victim protections that removed unauthorized charges from my credit report and restored my credit score to pre-theft levels. The improvement was gradual but steady, providing hope that the financial damage could eventually be completely reversed through patience and proper legal procedures. The most satisfying aspect of fighting back was discovering that I had more support than my parents' manipulation campaigns had led me to believe. Extended family members, friends, and colleagues who had initially accepted my parents' version of events began reaching out with apologies and offers of assistance once they understood the true circumstances of my situation. The legal proceedings against my parents moved forward with surprising efficiency once the evidence was properly organized and presented to prosecutors, who immediately recognized the sophistication and premeditation involved in their fraud operation. The district attorney's office assigned an experienced prosecutor named Lisa Chen to handle the case, and she expressed confidence that the documentation gathered by private investigator Marcus Thompson provided more than sufficient evidence for successful convictions. Brittany's return to the United States marked the beginning of consequences that extended far beyond mere financial restitution, as she was arrested at the airport on multiple charges of identity theft, credit card fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Her desperate attempts to blame my parents for misleading her about my consent fell apart when investigators reviewed her social media posts celebrating her luxury lifestyle and bragging about her supposed family wealth. The criminal charges against Brittany included separate counts for each fraudulent credit card application, each unauthorized purchase over $500, and each false statement made to financial institutions during the application process. Her sophisticated understanding of credit card fraud techniques suggested experience beyond this single incident, prompting investigators to examine her financial history for evidence of other victims. My parents faced even more serious charges because of their role in planning and coordinating the entire fraud operation, including conspiracy to commit identity theft, elder abuse for their attempts to manipulate my grandmother Evelyn's finances, and organized fraud for their systematic targeting of multiple family members over several years. The evidence revealed a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond my case. The court proceedings provided a public forum where the full extent of their manipulation tactics was documented and exposed, creating a permanent legal record that validated my experiences and demonstrated that my responses had been reasonable reactions to genuine criminal behavior. Prosecutor Chen methodically presented evidence that destroyed every element of my parents' justification narrative. The defendants planned this fraud operation for months, Chen explained during the preliminary hearing. They researched their daughter's financial habits, calculated exactly how much they could steal, and developed sophisticated psychological manipulation strategies designed to prevent their victim from seeking legal recourse. This wasn't desperate parents making poor decisions. This was organized criminal activity targeting a family member specifically because of her financial success and emotional loyalty. The civil lawsuit proceeded even more favorably than the criminal case, as my parents had no viable defense against documented theft and no assets hidden from court-ordered discovery proceedings. The judge ordered full restitution of all stolen funds plus interest, legal costs, and punitive damages that reflected the emotional trauma caused by their systematic betrayal of family trust. My parents were forced to sell their house and most of their possessions to satisfy the restitution order, a consequence that felt like justice rather than revenge because it restored money they had stolen rather than imposing additional punishment beyond appropriate legal penalties. The foreclosure they had planned to use as manipulation leverage against me became an inevitable result of their own criminal choices. Brittany's sentence included 18 months of probation, 300 hours of community service specifically focused on financial literacy education, and mandatory participation in counseling programs designed to address the entitlement attitudes that had enabled her criminal behavior. The judge made it clear that her cooperation in providing evidence against my parents had prevented a much harsher sentence. The no-contact restraining order issued to protect me from further harassment proved necessary when my parents attempted to continue their manipulation campaigns through intermediaries, including other family members who were unaware of the legal proceedings' actual outcomes. The court order made it clear that any attempts to contact me directly or indirectly would result in immediate arrest. My grandmother Evelyn's decision to move in with me temporarily provided her with protection from my parents' attempts to exploit her finances while giving me the opportunity to build a genuine relationship with the one family member who had supported me throughout this crisis. Her courage in documenting their criminal admissions had been crucial to the prosecution's success. The restoration of my credit profile proceeded smoothly once the fraud documentation was properly filed with all three major credit bureaus, and my credit score returned to excellent levels within 6 months of the initial theft. The criminal convictions created a permanent record that prevented my parents from using my identity for future fraud schemes. My career recovery was facilitated by my supervisor Janet's understanding of the circumstances once the legal proceedings provided clear evidence that my workplace difficulties had been caused by criminal victimization rather than poor personal judgment. The company even provided additional security measures to prevent workplace harassment by family members attempting to continue their manipulation campaigns. The most unexpected positive outcome was meeting David, an attorney who worked in the same building as my legal team and had observed my dignity and determination during the most difficult periods of the legal process. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than the kind of immediate intense connection that might have been driven by crisis circumstances. Tyler's decision to end our relationship during my crisis had initially felt like another casualty of my parents' selfishness, but in retrospect, his inability to support me during genuine hardship revealed character weaknesses that would have created problems in any serious long-term relationship. David's consistent presence and practical assistance demonstrated the difference between someone who loves conditionally and someone who understands genuine partnership. 6 months after the initial theft, my life had been completely rebuilt on a foundation of authentic relationships, professional success, and financial security that was protected by legal boundaries rather than depending on other people's goodwill or family loyalty. The trauma had been devastating but ultimately transformative, forcing me to develop strength and independence that I hadn't known I possessed. 1 year after that shocking bank alert that first revealed my family's betrayal, I found myself sitting in my new apartment, reviewing the final restitution payment that marked the complete financial resolution of their criminal case. The money represented more than just restored funds. It symbolized the end of a chapter in my life defined by exploitation and the beginning of a future built on authentic relationships and genuine self-respect. My career had not only recovered but flourished beyond my previous expectations, as the experience of navigating complex legal and financial challenges while maintaining professional responsibilities had demonstrated resilience and problem-solving abilities that impressed both supervisors and clients. The promotion to senior financial analyst came with a substantial salary increase that provided true financial security rather than the precarious stability I had maintained before my family's theft. David and I had been together for 8 months, and our relationship continued to deepen naturally without the kind of dramatic intensity that characterizes connections forged during crisis periods. His consistent support during the final stages of legal proceedings had been offered without expectation of reciprocal drama or emotional dependency, demonstrating the kind of mature partnership I had never experienced before. My grandmother Evelyn had thrived during her extended stay with me, regaining energy and confidence that had been gradually eroded by years of subtle manipulation and financial pressure from my parents. At 83, she was learning to use technology, exploring new hobbies, and building friendships with other seniors who shared her interests rather than her family obligations. The financial literacy workshops I had begun conducting for young adults had evolved into a regular speaking engagement that provided both personal satisfaction and additional income while helping others recognize and prevent the kind of family financial abuse I had experienced. Sharing my story publicly had connected me with hundreds of other survivors who found strength in knowing they weren't alone in facing systematic exploitation by people they trusted. My parents' current situation provided no satisfaction but rather a sense of relief that natural consequences had finally interrupted their pattern of manipulating others for financial gain. They were living in a small rental apartment, working entry-level jobs for the first time in years, and facing the reality of supporting themselves without access to credit or family resources to exploit. Brittany had completed her community service requirements and was working as a cashier at a discount retail store, experiencing for the first time the connection between work and income that most people learn during adolescence. Her social media presence had transformed from luxury lifestyle bragging to occasional posts about basic adult accomplishments like paying rent on time or saving money for small purchases. Neither my parents nor Brittany had attempted to contact me since the restraining order was issued, but extended family members occasionally provided updates that confirmed they were struggling with the practical challenges of supporting themselves through legitimate means. The hardship felt like natural justice rather than revenge because it simply meant they were finally experiencing the consequences of their own choices. My relationship with extended family members had been strengthened rather than damaged by the legal proceedings, as many relatives had shared their own experiences with manipulation and financial pressure from my parents over the years. The criminal case had provided permission for others to discuss patterns of behavior they had noticed but felt unable to challenge directly. The most profound change was my understanding of family relationships and the difference between love and loyalty based on respect versus obligation based on guilt and manipulation. Real family connections require mutual consideration and genuine care rather than one-sided sacrifice disguised as virtue or duty. My therapeutic work with Dr. Patricia Williams, who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse, had provided tools for recognizing manipulation tactics and maintaining boundaries that protected my emotional and financial well-being without requiring complete isolation from all family relationships. The key insight was learning to distinguish between people who made mistakes and asked for genuine forgiveness versus people who systematically exploited others and demanded acceptance without accountability. The final confrontation with my parents had come during the sentencing hearing, when Catherine had attempted one last manipulation campaign designed to convince me to request leniency from the judge. Her approach revealed that she still fundamentally misunderstood the situation, believing that sufficient guilt-tripping could convince me to prioritize her comfort over legal justice. "Madison, please tell the judge that we're good parents who made a mistake," Catherine had pleaded outside the courtroom. "You know we love you and never meant to hurt you. This whole situation got out of hand, but we're still your family. Doesn't that count for something? Can't you find it in your heart to forgive us and help us avoid prison time?" My response had been calm, confident, and completely final. You didn't make a mistake, Catherine. You planned and executed a sophisticated fraud operation targeting someone who loved and trusted you. The consequences you're facing are the natural results of your deliberate criminal choices, not punishments I'm imposing. Family relationships require respect and consideration, neither of which you've ever shown me. The peace that followed that final conversation was profound and lasting, representing not anger or vindictiveness but rather the serenity that comes from accepting reality and establishing boundaries based on self-respect rather than other people's expectations or demands. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn their approval and support, never realizing that some people are incapable of providing either regardless of how much effort others invest in pleasing them. Looking back on that terrible period when my carefully constructed life had collapsed due to their betrayal, I could see how the crisis had forced me to develop strength and independence that would serve me well in all future challenges. The experience had been devastating but ultimately transformative, teaching me to distinguish between relationships worth preserving and connections that existed only to enable exploitation. My current life felt genuinely peaceful in ways I had never experienced before, built on authentic connections with people who valued honesty and reciprocity rather than manipulation and control. The freedom to make decisions based on my own values and goals rather than other people's expectations or emotional blackmail was still occasionally surprising but always welcome. The financial security I now enjoyed was protected by legal boundaries and careful planning rather than depending on other people's goodwill or family loyalty that could be withdrawn without notice. My success belonged to me completely, earned through my own efforts and maintained through responsible choices that no one else could undermine or exploit. As I prepared for bed in my comfortable apartment, surrounded by possessions I had chosen and paid for myself, I reflected on how completely my life had been rebuilt on a foundation of self-respect and authentic relationships. The future felt bright with possibilities that I could pursue without fear of betrayal or manipulation from people who were supposed to love and support me. The final lesson from this experience was understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that refusal causes temporary pain or permanent changes in family relationships. Real love requires boundaries and accountability, not endless tolerance for abuse disguised as family loyalty or unconditional support. So here's my question for you. Have you ever experienced financial manipulation from family members or people you trusted completely? How did you handle the situation, and what advice would you give to others facing similar betrayal? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story helped you understand that setting boundaries with toxic family members isn't selfish but necessary for your own well-being. If you found this story valuable, please subscribe to my channel for more content about overcoming family dysfunction and building authentic relationships based on mutual respect. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar situations, because sometimes knowing you're not alone in facing family financial abuse can provide the strength needed to fight back and reclaim your life. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for all the supportive comments and messages I've received from viewers who have shared their own experiences with family betrayal and manipulation. Remember that you deserve relationships built on love and respect, not guilt and exploitation. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.